Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another special gathering. Before we begin, I want to know who's here with me tonight. Leave a comment with where you're watching from and what time it is for you. All right, let's get to the first story. My name is Nelson. I'm in my early 30s and I come from a family that has always worked in the mechanics field. I grew up in a rural area in the United States, fixing old bicycles and ancient tractors alongside my dad. Eventually, I moved to an urban area, hoping to find some stability. For a long time, I worked at an auto parts factory where I felt secure. I even managed to establish my own routine, saved up a little, and planned a modest but honest future. However, from one day to the next, the factory shut down. Nobody got a warning or time to prepare. I was laid off along with dozens of other employees, all of us with the same look of helplessness. For almost 3 months, I looked for jobs in various auto shops and parts stores. I spent all my savings on overdue bills, food, transportation for interviews, and minor repairs on my car, which was old and always breaking down. When I was almost out of money for rent, I got a call from my cousin Ruben. He asked how I was doing, and it was impossible to hide the despair in my voice. He told me he ran a classic car restoration shop in a nearby region and needed someone trustworthy to work there. He promised that if I worked hard, I could get on my feet in no time. "If you come here, I'll set aside a spot for you at the shop. You can start over, Nelson," he said, mixing concern and hope in his tone. I didn't think twice. I sold almost all my belongings, took my old car with its cracked body, and headed to where Ruben lived. I ended up settling in a modest little room near his shop. On my first day of work, I noticed the place was simpler than I had imagined. A garage full of workbenches, tools scattered everywhere, and a large outdoor area filled with rusty cars. But I liked the idea. I've always enjoyed getting my hands dirty, especially with vintage vehicles. Ruben introduced me to the team. In total, there were 6 of us. One guy did the welding, another handled painting, and some took care of disassembly and cleaning. There was only one person taking care of the administrative side, a woman named Martha, who caught my attention from the very start. She was about 25, had expressive eyes, and a way of speaking that drew you in. She greeted me with a gentle smile. "Hi, Nelson, I heard we'll be working together. If you ever need anything, just let me know." I felt an unusual nervousness when she looked at me. It was as if she could see deeper than I was willing to reveal. Still, I went about my routine without overthinking it. I quickly learned the restoration process. Dismantle each part of the car, see what could be reused, sand it down, replace pieces, then put everything back together. It wasn't too different from what I'd done at the factory, but now the work felt more artisanal. Everything got covered in oil, dust, and paint. Martha, for her part, dealt with numbers, ordered parts, and stayed in touch with buyers interested in classic cars. Sometimes I had to give her reports, the cost of each new part, what would be restored, the estimated timeline for each phase. Because of that, we started spending more time together. At first, I only saw her as a co-worker. My priority was to save enough money to pay off my debts. But as the weeks went by, I noticed Martha had a sweet way of striking up a conversation. She always offered me coffee and asked if I needed help with any spreadsheets. And when we were alone, she looked at me in a way that made my heart race. Ruben didn't seem to pay much attention to it, or if he noticed something, he never showed it. One afternoon, after a tiring day of restoration, Martha asked me to go with her to a small corner bar that didn't even have a clear name. I was still covered in grease, but I accepted without hesitation. At the bar, we chatted about our lives. She said she lived alone, had come from another region, and didn't have much contact with her family. At some point, she lightly touched my hand, and I felt something different in the air. "Have you always been this serious, Nelson?" she asked, smiling. "I was more cheerful as a teenager, but life toughened me up," I replied, trying to steer clear of any emotional exposure. "Maybe we can change that," she said without elaborating. When we left, it was already nighttime. Our goodbye included a hug that lasted a little longer than usual. In the following days, we got closer. I wondered if Ruben would mind if he found out we were developing some sort of bond. He'd always been a bit protective of what was his, but I figured our work relationship and family ties were solid enough not to cause trouble. About a month later, when I was fully settled at the shop, Ruben invited me out for a soda at a simple diner on a Friday evening. "Nelson, I need to tell you something, but promise me you won't judge," he began, fiddling with his cup. I agreed, still confused. Then Ruben revealed he had been casually seeing Martha from time to time. It wasn't anything serious, but he preferred to keep things discreet. He talked about it like it was no big deal, as if she were just a fling. He asked me to be careful not to let it affect the shop's environment. My head spun. I didn't know how to react. I'd already been getting caught up in Martha's smiles, and suddenly I learned Ruben was also involved with her. That night, I lied to my cousin, saying I was fine. I couldn't sleep. My mind replayed every conversation and every look Martha and I had exchanged. Was I heading down a dead-end road? The next day, I tried to keep my distance from her at the shop, but she noticed. "You're acting differently. Did something happen?" I couldn't lie. I told her about my talk with Ruben. She fell silent, yet she placed her hand on my arm and asked me to listen calmly. Then she confessed that what she had with Ruben was just physical, while what she felt for me was different, stronger. She said she'd only recently realized it and didn't want to lose me. Her words shook me, and I was too weak to resist believing them. We began meeting in secret. She told me not to worry, that she'd break things off with Ruben once the shop's finances were more stable. She insisted the business was growing rapidly, and he still needed her for administrative matters, at least until he could hire someone else. I didn't like the situation, but I went along, giving space to the emotion that had taken hold of me. That's when everything started going downhill. 2 weeks later, Ruben began having severe stomach pains and a fever that wouldn't go away. He was a healthy man, rarely got sick, but suddenly he couldn't even stand up. He was admitted to the hospital, but the doctors couldn't pinpoint the cause. He seemed to be wasting away, as if something were eating him up from the inside. During that time, the shop basically fell under my responsibility. I had to deal with deadlines, sales, part purchases, and team coordination. Martha took on a serious demeanor, saying we had to work hard to keep things afloat and avoid gossip. But I noticed a strange glint in her eyes. At first, I thought it was just worry. One day, while searching for contracts in Ruben's office, I found a small bag wrapped in black cloth in the back of a drawer. When I opened it, I saw a photo of Ruben alongside a bundle of hair strands tied together, surrounded by symbols I couldn't identify. There was also a small doll made of dark fabric scraps. The sight made me feel uneasy. Initially, I thought it was some meaningless, superstitious item, but I couldn't ignore the context. Ruben was very ill, and this strange package seemed intentional. I put everything into a box and took it home, unsure what to do. A few years earlier, I had a friend named Susie who believed in strong prayers, negative energies, folk rituals, and other spiritual practices. I decided to call her and describe what I'd found. I didn't mention names, but said it was a delicate situation. Susie was quiet for a few seconds, then advised me to seek someone with experience in heavy works. You need to find a trustworthy faith healer or spiritual guide. I have a feeling this isn't a joke, Nelson, she warned, sounding concerned. I asked around discreetly at the shop if anyone knew someone involved in prayers or spiritual healing, but I didn't want to raise suspicion. Travis, the welder, mentioned there was an older lady named Ms. Albina who lived in a simple house in the rural outskirts, and people sought her for advice. It wasn't easy to get to her place. You had to drive down a dirt road full of potholes, then walk along a path of tall vegetation. Late one afternoon, I got in my car and went there without telling Martha or anyone else. I knocked on the door and an elderly woman appeared leaning on a cane. She gazed at me as if she already knew why I'd come. "You've come because of something bad you found at work?" she asked bluntly. My body froze. I opened the box and showed her what I'd found. She examined the items carefully, her expression turning to displeasure. This was prepared to destroy the health and will of whoever is in this photo. It's heavy stuff. If it's not undone, this person may worsen over time, she said gravely. I explained that the man in the photo was my cousin, hospitalized with no clear diagnosis. She nodded as if it were obvious. It could have been done for revenge or to remove someone from the picture. Reasons vary, but the effect is always dangerous. I asked what to do. Ms. Albina explained there was a ritual to break this kind of spell, but it involved a special set of herbs, candles, prayers, and above all, that the target be open to receiving help. I offered her a small sum of money as she charged for the supplies used in healing work. She gave me instructions to place these objects at the center of Ruben's office that same night and light 3 consecrated candles. After reciting certain prayers she taught me, I should bury the remains in a remote spot, making sure no one else touched them. But be aware that when we break a spell, the energy returns to the one who cast it. And if they did this out of desire, the backlash might be even worse for them. The thought of Martha crossed my mind, but I tried not to jump to conclusions. I took the candles and dried herbs back home, waiting until nightfall to make sure everyone was gone from the shop. I locked the office door and followed Ms. Albina's instructions, the place filled with the pungent smell of burning herbs. There were no dramatic phenomena, but I felt a tension in the air, an unexplainable discomfort. Around midnight, I gathered the remaining items and drove to an empty lot miles away. I dug a shallow hole and buried everything. When I got back, my hands were trembling, not so much from any supernatural fear, but from insecurity. The realization that I was entangled in something far beyond a mere love affair gone wrong. In the days that followed, Ruben began to improve slowly but steadily. His fevers subsided. His appetite returned. Meanwhile, Martha started acting strangely. She always seemed tired, spoke little, and gave vague answers. At first I thought it was just stress, but I noticed that sometimes she'd look at me with a face full of anguish. Then one morning she knocked on my apartment door asking to talk. I opened it and found her with deep circles under her eyes, looking unusually pale. She walked in without a word and sat on the couch, cradling her head as if dizzy. It took me a moment to ask what was going on. Then she burst out, "Do you know anything weird that's going on, Nelson? I've been having nightmares and body aches. My heart races for no reason. I feel like I see things at home, but I'm not sure if they're hallucinations." She continued, "The shop feels different. Ruben's getting better, but I can't sleep well. Everything seems out of place. I feel like something has come back against me." I admitted I knew about some sort of spell, but I didn't accuse her directly. She started crying, and in the face of my silence, she confessed, "I just wanted Ruben out of the picture so I could be free with you. I did something I was told about. They said he'd get sick but recover quickly. I never thought it would go this far. Please help me." It was hard to believe she, with her gentle demeanor, had gone down such a path. At the same time, I couldn't deny what I'd seen myself. I was furious, yet I also felt sorry for her. She was clearly tormented by something, whether psychological or spiritual. I remembered Ms. Albina's words, "Energy returns to whoever cast the spell." "Martha, I don't know if there's anything else I can do. You have to face the consequences of your actions. Maybe you should look for whoever helped you, or another person who can break this connection." She started trembling, begging me to go with her somewhere to get cured. I couldn't refuse. Despite everything, I didn't want to watch anyone wither away. But over the course of the week, Martha worsened. She ran a fever that wouldn't subside, lost weight, and barely showed up at the shop. Rumor had it that she was seriously ill, and some said it was punishment. One day I got a call from a psychiatric hospital. They said Martha had given them my number because she seemed disoriented and had been sent there after some kind of breakdown. I went to visit her. She was restless, didn't recognize people clearly, and spoke about presences haunting her, mentioning shadows that pulled at her arms at night. There was no visible sign of any of that, but she was deeply shaken, panic etched on her face. I left feeling awful. Ruben, on the other hand, was nearly recovered, and I wasn't sure if I should tell him everything that had happened. In the end, I kept quiet. I only mentioned I had dealt with some spell offering I'd found, so it wouldn't harm him anymore. He didn't ask many questions, more focused on returning to his routine. At the shop, the atmosphere felt lighter. People worked without tension, cars got finished on time, and new orders came in. But I didn't feel right. My conscience was heavy with the knowledge that Martha was in that state, and that in a way I'd allowed it all to escalate. After all, I'd let myself get involved. Maybe I was the spark that pushed her to seek out that kind of practice. Weeks passed, and I tried to go on with my life, focusing on daily tasks. Ruben offered me the chance to run a new branch of the shop in a busier area. I accepted without hesitation. I needed a fresh start. But shortly before moving, I began receiving strange phone calls from unknown numbers. Whenever I picked up, I only heard heavy breathing and a faint murmur. Sometimes it sounded like Martha's voice, but there was always a lot of static in the background. I hung up, unsure if it was my imagination or some prank. I also noticed odd things in my small apartment. One late afternoon, I returned from the grocery store and found the door ajar, even though I was sure I'd locked it. I went in, looked around, and in the bedroom I saw a crude rag doll lying on my bed. I had no idea who had left it there. It looked old, worthless. Next to it was a piece of paper covered in scribbles that made no sense. I was frightened. As much as I tried to stay rational, I felt that this was connected to the entire situation with Martha and the spell. I called Susie again, and she once more suggested I seek spiritual help. Annoyed, I argued I wasn't ready to start ghost hunting. She just said that if I didn't wrap this up properly, I might keep feeling the reverberations of the negativity surrounding the whole ordeal. I still resisted diving back into the matter, but a series of incidents changed my mind. 2 nights in a row, I woke up feeling a weight on my chest and difficulty breathing. The doctor said I was fine, maybe just anxious. But I began sensing some instability in my home, a vibe I couldn't describe. Objects appeared out of place, doors slammed softly without any apparent draft. I decided to return to Ms. Albina, the lady who helped me before. I told her what was happening. She listened, then said there might be a link that wasn't fully broken yet. If Martha had died or lost her sanity because of the spell, the energy tied to me might still linger. I asked if there was another ritual to do, but she explained it depended on where the connection had formed most strongly. Did you two have a place that symbolized the start of your bond? Maybe a bar, an apartment, or a street where things escalated? I thought of the bar where Martha and I first had a drink together. That unexpected invitation was the start of our closeness. I felt a chill remembering it, but I stayed composed. Ms. Albina told me to take some coarse salt, white candles, and water blended with certain herbs she gave me. It was crucial to be alone in that place and perform prayers to dissolve any negative tie. Late on a Monday night, I went to that bar, which by then was closed and seemed abandoned. The doors were loosely shut but not locked. I slipped inside with only my phone's flashlight. The tables were stacked, the shelves empty, and a musty smell filled the place. I closed the door behind me. I sprinkled coarse salt in the corners, lit the candles on one of the tables, and poured the herbal water around them. As I recited the prayers Ms. Albina had recommended, I felt an overwhelming urge to leave. My voice sounded strange in the silence. I saw nothing inexplicable, yet there was a heavy atmosphere, as if that place stored our memories intensely. I prayed softly, asking forgiveness for bad choices, asking to move on without harboring grudges. After a few minutes, I felt it was enough. I gathered the candle remnants, ran my hand over the rusty chairs, and left, closing the door as best I could. My heart pounded on the way back to my car, but I forced myself to stay calm, telling myself it was all part of an inner healing process. I got home feeling somewhat relieved, but uncertain about the true impact of what I'd done. That night, I slept well. In the following days, I finished up my transfer to the new branch. The work environment was different, more organized, and I could focus on what mattered, starting anew. Gradually, the strange phone calls stopped, and I no longer found odd objects in my home. Slowly, I accepted that things were settling down. About 3 months later, I met a woman named Dulcie at a project management course I took to improve my work at the shop. She had a calm way about her, a sincere smile, and her interest in me developed naturally, without any pressure or secrets. We began going out and talking about lighter topics. I realized my life was finally moving in a better direction. Still, I sometimes thought of Martha. I was never entirely sure what happened to her after that breakdown. I heard rumors she had died, but it was never officially confirmed. The word around the old shop was that her family never showed up, and she just disappeared from the records. I preferred not to dig any deeper. I'd learned the hard way that not everything needs a final explanation. I stayed in touch with Ruben, who kept running the business. He seemed fine, holding no big grudges. We never openly talked about Martha or the spell. Maybe that was for the best. Occasionally he asked if I felt anything unusual, and I'd say everything was fine, that I just wanted peace. I have to admit, sometimes when I work late at the new shop, I get a brief sense of unease. Like a part of me still waits for some closure. But I push that feeling away. reminding myself that life goes on and we can't remain stuck in the past. Life taught me that certain events leave marks we can't fully erase, but it's up to us to keep moving forward and create new stories without letting the past imprison us. Today, after everything, I feel like I survived something best described as an obsession spiral. It wasn't a horror movie with screams or monsters jumping out of the dark, but it was a suffocating reality, making me question my sanity and my values. Maybe I'll never know if it was all just emotional imbalance or if some unknown forces were at play. But one thing is certain: those experiences changed me. I keep walking, learning to forgive my mistakes and not to meddle with circumstances that can lead to tragedy. I live one day at a time, avoiding hasty judgments, because I've seen that the boundaries between what we call real and what we consider supernatural can be much thinner than we imagine. And as long as that lesson remains with me, I know I won't repeat the same steps that pushed me to the edge. Before we move on to the next story, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell to get the latest stories. Your presence means a lot, and your support is essential. All right, let's keep going. My name is Cassian. I'm a little over 30 now, but the events I'm about to describe took place more than 10 years ago. For a long time, I tried to push these memories into a corner of my mind, thinking that if I never spoke of them, they might cease to exist. However, every time I woke up in the middle of the night feeling the same restlessness, I realized that would never be possible. My life back then was quite ordinary. I worked as an assistant in a small thrift store. It was a cramped place with narrow aisles, where you could find anything from old books to outdated sound systems. Often we'd only have 2 or 3 customers a day. The store was owned by Ms. Clarice, an elderly lady who reminded me of my grandmother. Despite the stern look in her eyes, she had a kind heart. When I wasn't at the store, I usually spent the afternoons with my 2 best friends, Julian and Raphael. Julian was pure energy. He was always coming up with outings, meetups, and any excuse to go out. He had a small, noisy scooter that he insisted on calling his freedom machine, although it was constantly breaking down. Raphael, on the other hand, had a more reserved demeanor. He spent some time working as an intern in an office and planned to finish his history major in college. He enjoyed talking about popular traditions, folklore rituals, and interesting tidbits he learned from books. I liked listening to his theories, even though I wasn't much of a believer in what he called hidden forces. One day, Raphael showed up saying there would be a photo exhibition in a well-known city square that weekend. The event would feature independent artists, along with small musical performances. Julian got excited right away. He wanted to meet new people and have a few beers. I, though not very enthusiastic, agreed to go. I needed to break out of my routine, and somehow I felt that something interesting might happen that night. On Saturday, I headed to the square after closing the thrift store. The night was pleasant, and there was a festive atmosphere in the air. Food stands offered a variety of snacks. Art displays hung on improvised panels, and people sat on the ground chatting. I strolled among the booths without seeing any sign of my friends, so I messaged Julian and Raphael, letting them know where I was. While waiting for a response, I noticed a small makeshift stage where a trio was playing folk music with modern beats. I stood there for a few minutes trying to relax. That's when I noticed a young woman standing not too far from me, watching the stage. She wore a long dress with mandala-like prints. Her gaze was serene, almost hypnotic, and she held a frosted glass cup. I can't explain why she caught my eye. There were plenty of people around, but my eyes kept wandering back to her. My phone vibrated. It was Julian saying he and Raphael were near the event entrance. I turned to look for them, but before I could walk away, the young woman crossed my path and greeted me with a smile. "Do you know if this band plays here regularly?" Her question was so simple that I stammered for a moment, not expecting her to speak to me. I replied that I didn't think so, that this was probably a special performance for the photo exhibition. "I see, it's different. I like the way they mix traditional instruments with modern beats." She spoke calmly, but there was something about her posture that intrigued me. She seemed like someone who had seen a lot in life, though she wasn't old. I responded that I also found it pretty cool. Before I knew what else to say, Julian appeared behind me, tapping my shoulder. "Cassian, there you are. I'm starving. Let's get something to eat." I introduced Julian to the young woman, whose name was Layla. She smiled and said she would love to join us because she was hungry too. We headed to a food stand for sandwiches. At some point, Raphael found us and joined in the conversation. Within minutes, the three of them seemed to get along like old friends. Layla explained that she loved attending alternative events and said she had come with some girlfriends, but they had scattered around the square. She ended up alone near the stage. After we finished eating, Layla asked if we could go with her to meet a group of acquaintances gathered further ahead. When we arrived, we found 4 women who introduced themselves with poetic names: Flora, Dahlia, Yara, and Cece. They all wore colorful outfits and carried fabric bags or shoulder backpacks. There was also a guy named Oswald, who seemed to be the quietest of them. They were talking about a trip they were planning for the upcoming holiday weekend, something involving crafts and traditional dances in a coastal area not too far away. Julian was immediately interested. "I'm up for any adventure, but when are you going?" Dahlia laughed. "Probably next weekend. We rented a simple house with a few rooms and a big yard. It's pretty far from the center, but the beaches there are gorgeous." Raphael hesitated. He wasn't one to head off without planning. He glanced at me as if seeking my opinion. At that moment, I wasn't sure if it was worth going. But Layla, who noticed our doubt, was convincing when she said it would be a unique experience with people who appreciated popular culture, discussion circles, and knowledge exchange. "Every time I go there, I learn something new," Layla said, looking straight at me. "Maybe you'd like to explore these customs that are nearly forgotten in the big cities." As skeptical as I was, I admit I was intrigued by the idea. Besides, Layla's magnetic personality made me curious. She was unlike anyone I'd ever met. I told Julian and Raphael that if they were up for it, I'd go too. They looked at each other and shrugged, knowing I rarely agreed to spontaneous adventures. Julian beamed, and Raphael eventually agreed after a quick chat with Flora. I briefly commented to him about the group's unusual names, but Raphael said he knew many people who adopted creative or nature-related names, so he didn't find it too odd. Over the next week, we kept in touch with Layla's group by messaging. We started meeting in cafes and craft fairs, always chatting lightly about music, literature, and culture. At some point, it was decided that we would go by car because Layla managed to borrow a vehicle from a relative. Julian was thrilled and said it would be our best trip yet, something to celebrate the end of the year drawing near. Saturday morning came and it was time for the trip. We met in front of a closed diner, chosen as a discreet rendezvous point. Layla pulled up in an old but well-kept brown car, with two of her friends, Yara and Cece, already inside. Julian, Raphael, and I got in. Some of the other acquaintances would follow in another vehicle. We loaded our backpacks into the trunk and set off. The drive was long and filled with landscapes that changed every few miles. Sections of dense wooded areas gave way to farmland, then to small towns. We stopped once to buy water, fruit, and some snacks to munch on. Layla and her friends talked about the traditional dances and songs they had discovered on previous trips. Julian and Raphael, who'd never had contact with that kind of scene, seemed curious. I tried to stay attentive to the route, but I couldn't pinpoint many landmarks. Layla did most of the driving, and we were often distracted by conversations, music, and laughter. I also felt a strange euphoria, as if the whole ride had a hypnotic quality. By late afternoon, we reached our destination. In the distance, we could see a single-story house with no fences, painted a faded cream color. There were no neighbors nearby. The lot was large, with trimmed grass and a few trees on the side. Yara opened a wooden gate, indicating that this was the place. We parked the car and started unloading our backpacks. The air had a salty tang, so I guessed the ocean was close. We settled into 2 bedrooms. Julian and Raphael shared one with me, while Layla and her friends took the other. The house had a spacious living room with few pieces of furniture and a kitchen equipped with an old refrigerator and a gas stove. From the way Yara and Cece moved around, it seemed they already knew where things were, as if they'd been there before. Layla just smiled, saying everything was already arranged. Early in the evening, we put together a simple dinner. We made some rice, vegetables, and a fish we'd bought on the way. It was all very basic. Then we gathered in the living room to chat and share some laughter. After a while, Dahlia and Flora arrived, bringing more bags and percussion instruments. Music sprang up spontaneously, accompanied by a relaxed atmosphere. They played drums and tambourines, singing tunes that reminded me of folk or spiritual rhythms. I leaned against one of the few chairs, feeling a mix of admiration and mild concern. Everything was casual, yet there was something in Layla's and the other women's voices that made me pensive. They seemed tightly bonded, almost tribal. Julian, of course, jumped right into the dancing. Raphael kept a bit of distance but clapped along, seemingly entertained. After a while, Layla asked me to step outside with her. There was a yard that stretched to a wire fence, and beyond that, I assumed, was a drop leading down to the beach. I followed her, breathing in the cooler night air. She told me she'd been coming to that spot since she was a teenager, thanks to a family friend. She said she liked to come here to clear her mind. "Have you always been looking for something different?" I asked. "Not always, but I believe there are things not everyone understands. I just like to feel what the world can offer, without barriers." There was a certain poetry in her words. I stood there momentarily speechless. She gave me a soft smile and went back inside, leaving me alone in the yard, staring into the darkness that stretched over the horizon. Later on, most of us were tired and getting ready for bed. Yara and Cece, however, said they were going to do something special to harmonize the house's energy. They went out with some candles and incense that had a sweet floral scent. They mentioned it was an old custom but didn't elaborate. Raphael asked me to join him in watching them. Outside, we saw the two of them drawing small circles on the ground and placing lit candles in the center. They whispered words we couldn't make out. Then they went back inside, offering no further explanation. The next morning, I woke up to the smell of freshly brewed coffee and pancakes frying on the stove. Layla, more energetic than ever, invited us to visit the beach. about a 15-minute walk away. Raphael opted to stay at the house to read. Julian agreed right away. The other women and Oswald came along too. We followed a sandy path until we reached a wide beach where the waves crashed forcefully. It was a beautiful sight, but there were very few people around. We laid out some towels and chatted. At one point, Layla and her friends moved closer to a small improvised altar on the rocks. They seemed to be admiring symbols and drawings painted there. Julian nudged me, curious, but I merely shook my head. I didn't think it wise to interrupt. They touched some hanging objects that looked like ribbons or rustic necklaces. I went back to lying on the sand to rest. When we returned to the house around noon, we noticed Raphael wasn't in the living room or the bedroom. We found only a note saying he had gone to town to buy more supplies. We spent the rest of the day without much happening, cooking, talking, taking bucket baths out in the yard. There was no shower. But at night, things took a different turn. After dinner, Layla and her friends arranged chairs in a circle. Dahlia grabbed a guitar, Flora started tapping a tambourine, and they began a soft, steady chant. They invited everyone to sit and offered us a drink they called homemade blend. It tasted like a strong, bitter tea. I felt somewhat uneasy, but I drank it to be polite. Julian downed it without hesitation. Raphael, who had come back from town with provisions, sipped it and grimaced but kept drinking. As the music and conversation flowed, I realized the electric lights were off and the house was lit only by candles placed on the floor. The breeze swept in through the unglazed windows, carrying the smell of the sea. Layla sat down next to me, not saying anything, just gently touching my arm. A drowsiness began to wash over me. I assumed it was fatigue, but it could have been the effect of that drink. Everyone's speech seemed to slow down. The drowsiness was becoming widespread. At some point, Yara stood up and asked us all to head to the yard. I didn't question it, maybe influenced by the strange feeling of lightness. Once outside, I saw they had arranged candles on the ground, forming neat shapes. A trail of small stones led us to one corner of the yard. The breeze felt colder. Dahlia and Cece played percussion instruments in a slow, steady rhythm. The blend of candlelight and the soft drumming created an atmosphere that would have been beautiful if it weren't so uncanny. In a low voice, Layla began speaking about honoring the forces of nature. She said this was a special moment for anyone who wanted to connect with something bigger. Julian chuckled, somewhat awkwardly, but stayed put, nodding as if in a trance. Raphael, looking more alert, glanced around as though trying to understand what was happening. I asked him if he was okay, and he just shrugged. The music continued, accompanied by chanting in a language I couldn't identify. The words sounded like a mantra. My vision blurred for a few seconds, but I tried to remain standing. The air felt heavy. Even so, Layla took me by the hand and led me to the center of the yard, where candles formed a circle. My feet stepped on something powdery. "Don't worry, Cassian, this is a protection rite," she said. I didn't know how to react. Flora guided Julian to another circle, while Cece led Raphael to a third. Oswald was there too, but I couldn't make out what he was saying. He seemed to be murmuring to himself, as if in a distant place. When I looked back, I saw Yara tossing a handful of herbs into an iron pot, producing white smoke. The drum beats grew louder. Facing me, Layla spoke about emptying the mind and letting the body follow the flow. My breathing quickened for no apparent reason. I tried to leave the circle, but my legs gave out. She noticed my unease and held my shoulders, telling me that soon I would understand everything. That's when I heard Julian let out a loud laugh, totally out of place. "Do you guys really think this is safe?" he shouted, sounding confused, and got no reply. Trying to stay calm, I glanced toward Raphael's circle. He had his eyes half closed but wasn't protesting. The entire scene felt like a shared dream. Part of me wanted to believe it was all just some artistic performance, but the intense expressions on Layla's and the others' faces made it clear this was not a game. Suddenly, the smoke Yara was creating drifted through the yard, and the aroma intensified. I felt someone touching my back. When I turned, I saw Dahlia behind me, holding a small clay container. She took my hand and poured a viscous liquid into it, saying it would help me open my spirit. I tried to pull away, but she persisted. Just then Julian staggered and dropped to his knees in the middle of his circle. Flowers and leaves were scattered around him, and Cece was muttering words I couldn't grasp. Raphael tried to stand, but seemed unable to move properly. I shouted his name. He looked at me in alarm, but he didn't react further. Then Layla's voice, close to my ear, sent a chill down my spine. "Trust us. From this moment on, everything will be different." I wanted to reply, but I couldn't. It was as if my will had been numbed. The last thing I remember before blacking out was looking up at the sky and seeing the treetops swaying overhead. When I came to, I was lying on the living room floor, my head resting on a worn-out cushion. The house was silent, except for the sound of wind blowing through the half-open door. I got up slowly, feeling nauseous. My mouth was dry. I didn't see anyone around, not in the living room or the kitchen. By instinct, I opened the front door and stepped into the yard. The sun was coming up, turning everything a reddish hue in the early morning light. The candles were gone. There were marks on the ground as if the dirt had been disturbed, but nothing that clearly indicated what had happened. I called out for Julian and Raphael but got no response. I walked around the property, my legs trembling with each step. Then I noticed a trail of footprints leading beyond the yard, toward the drop-off. I stumbled over dry branches as I made my way there. The slope led down to a sort of cove. I stood at the edge, but I couldn't see anyone below. I lingered for a while, unsure whether to shout, climb down, or run. My head felt heavy and I nearly passed out again. I imagined Julian and Raphael lying somewhere unconscious, needing help, but I had no idea where to start looking. I went back into the house, hoping to find Layla or anyone else from the group. The living room remained empty, with no sign of a party or any ritual. I checked the bedrooms. Yara's and Cece's bags were gone. The closet where Layla kept some personal items was open and empty. The kitchen door was wide open, the wind slamming it repeatedly. It seemed everyone had left except me. I spotted my backpack in a corner of the living room and grabbed my phone. No signal. I tried again, but still nothing. I decided I had to leave and find help, but I didn't know where to go. The long dirt road, mostly deserted, would be risky to walk alone. The car was no longer parked out front. I took a deep breath. I remembered that Raphael had walked into town the day before, so maybe that was my only option. I gathered what I could and started walking. I spent hours following the dirt path under the hot sun. Eventually, I spotted a dusty road where old buses and motorcycles passed by. I asked a young man if there was a police station nearby. He pointed me to another dirt route that led to a small settlement. I followed his directions, my body exhausted and my mind in panic. Upon reaching the station, I explained to the officers that my friends had disappeared. I told them everything, or almost everything. The officer who listened seemed skeptical, barely reacting to my account. He said the region was full of groups hosting private gatherings, and it wasn't uncommon to see substance use that caused confusion or hallucinations. "You said this house is near a beach?" "Yes, but I don't know the name of the beach or the exact area. It's isolated." He sighed and called another officer to go with us. We took their car and drove back along the route, hoping to find the house. But since Layla had driven most of the way and the access road was nearly hidden, I didn't have the exact location in mind. Where I thought the entrance should be, we only found a blocked passage overrun with tall weeds. There was no sign or house number. We got out to investigate, but the thick brush made it hard to see anything. We tried a bit further with no luck. The officer, losing patience, said they would file a report, but that without any solid reference points, it was difficult to proceed. I ended up staying in a makeshift lodging near the police station. I used a payphone to call my family. My father answered, and I could only tell him I was okay, but needed someone to pick me up. I didn't go into details. A cousin came for me the next day and we drove back home together. My legs ached and my mind was overwhelmed. I spent at least a week in bed, tormented by fever and nightmares. Once I felt better, I went to talk to Julian's and Raphael's families to explain what had happened. They looked at me in horror. Neither Julian nor Raphael had been in touch since before the trip. I laid it all out, hoping that despite how absurd it sounded, they could help me find some clue. We filed missing persons reports, hung posters at bus stations, and asked around at hospitals. Nothing worked. The following months were pure torment. Guilt consumed me. If I hadn't agreed to that trip, maybe none of this would have happened. The faces of Julian and Raphael haunted me on the rare nights I managed to sleep. I went back to the police station multiple times, always getting the same answer. "No new information, sorry." One day, a police officer pulled me aside and mentioned rumors about rituals and cults in coastal regions, often in abandoned houses. He said that when people disappear in those contexts, there are rarely any leads. He also noted that many bodies end up drifting far away on the tide, making them hard to locate early on. He suggested that the families and I look for volunteer groups and NGOs. We did just that. We traveled to the region several more times, spoke with locals, showed photos of Julian and Raphael. Some people claimed they had seen similar-looking young men on the road, but nothing conclusive emerged. As time passed, hope of finding them alive dwindled. Julian's mother called me in tears every day. Raphael had an older sister who fell into a deep depression. Unable to cope, I lost my job at the thrift store. My mental health was deteriorating. Almost a year later, we got the news we had feared. A fisherman found human remains on a remote beach, far from where the house was supposed to be. The police collected what they could and asked the families to go to the medical examiner's office. At first, a silver chain that Julian always wore and a ring of Raphael's stood out. But official identification came a few months later, through DNA testing. We received the confirmation in an official report soon after. There wasn't much left to bury, only fragments. I returned home devastated. I spent days shut in my room, refusing visitors. When I finally tried to move on, I realized I couldn't handle crowded places or certain types of music that reminded me of the trip. I ended up moving to a quieter neighborhood, trying to escape every painful reminder. Even so, sometimes I'd think I saw Layla on some street corner, wearing the same colorful dress, her gaze piercing my soul. I'd panic and cross to the other side. I'm not sure if it was just my trauma or if there was something else. But those eyes seemed to follow me everywhere. Years went by. We never found out who Layla and the others really were. I tried searching for their names on social media, but nothing turned up. It was as though they'd never officially existed. Anyone who heard my story assumed I was making it up or exaggerating. I can't blame them for doubting me because sometimes I doubt myself. Yet the consequences were far too real to be dismissed as mere delusions. Today I try to live as simply as I can. I avoid lengthy conversations about the past, but I decided to write this account so I wouldn't forget any of the details. If I die tomorrow, I want it known that Julian and Raphael didn't vanish willingly. They were taken by something I might never understand. If anyone reads this, I urge caution with groups who promise spiritual experiences and blend unknown substances. Sometimes the cost is higher than anyone can pay, and yes, I still have nightmares. I wake up drenched in sweat remembering that yard, the intense aroma, and the candles on the ground. Occasionally I mentally hear the echo of those drums from that night. I'm not sure if these are just memories or if some presence insists on reminding me that things aren't over. Either way, I move forward, carrying an absence that nothing can ever fill. If you're enjoying the stories, don't forget to leave a like. It really makes a difference. Okay, let's continue. I was 46 years old when it all began, and up to that point my life followed a calm rhythm without great thrills or scares. Good evening, Dom. My name is Humbert. I'm an appliance repair technician specialized in refrigeration. I've been working since I was a teenager, going through ups and downs, but never losing my direction. I've always been the type who prefers fixing things rather than buying new ones. My routine took shape thanks to loyal clients, emergency services, and a few breaks for lunch at simple diners. It wasn't a luxurious life, but I was proud of every appliance I brought back to working condition. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood where each house had a small front yard and low fences that made it easy to see everyone around. My own home barely had a gate. I liked watching people walk by on the sidewalk. One Wednesday morning, I received a phone call from a community health clinic located in a historic district. They said the air conditioner had been acting up for weeks and that other technicians hadn't managed to fix it. I was used to these types of calls, so I didn't suspect anything. I went there, greeted the receptionist, who explained the details, and then they took me to the clinic's director, Dr. Letitia, a woman in her early 40s who spoke in a firm but polite manner. She led me to the waiting room, where the air conditioner kept failing. I noticed a strange noise, as if it hadn't been serviced for months. While I opened the panel, Letitia stood by with her arms crossed, watching my every move. I could tell she was strict, but she explained everything clearly without beating around the bush. At that moment, my only concern was finding out why the system wasn't functioning properly. I spent about 2 hours fixing the internal parts, replacing a piece and cleaning the tubing. During that time, Dr. Letitia checked medical records and spoke with a few patients, but she'd always glance in my direction to see if I needed anything. When I finished, I showed her which part had caused the problem and left my contact info for future checkups. It was all very professional, but as I was leaving, I noticed she sized me up, as though trying to understand more about who I was. A few days later, I got called back. The air conditioner was once again showing temperature fluctuations, some secondary electrical issue this time. Letitia seemed more comfortable now. We walked past the clinic's small kitchen, where there were thermoses of coffee and homemade pastries. She offered me a cup of freshly brewed coffee, saying it was her way of apologizing for all the back and forth with the system. While we stood there drinking, we started talking about unimportant things, like the unstable weather and the patient flow at the clinic. Our conversation flowed more naturally than I expected. I've never been much of a charmer, but I sensed some level of empathy in the air. I left there convinced she wasn't just a serious professional, but also someone who carried a lot of responsibility on her shoulders. At the end of that visit, we shared a couple of jokes about how hard it was to find replacement parts. Not long after, I decided to invite her out for a quick snack at a local spot famous for selling fried pastries, those greasy ones that everyone secretly loves. She hesitated at first. My daughter Talitha doesn't always take it well when I go out. And honestly, I don't like mixing personal life with work. I said it didn't need to be a formal event, just a quick bite to help her unwind. She agreed, but made it clear she didn't want people at the clinic talking about it. I smiled and promised to keep it between us. We met on a Saturday afternoon at a small diner without flashy signs. Letitia arrived in a simple floral dress, yet she still struck me as elegant. We ordered 2 fried pastries and natural fruit juices. The conversation was so light that we almost forgot what had brought us together in the first place, the air conditioner problem. After that outing, I worked up the courage again and invited her for a stroll in a nearby park. She accepted. We walked, talking about our lives. I found out she had been widowed many years ago, losing her husband suddenly. She said Talitha had been entering adolescence at the time and that their relationship wasn't simple ever since. That day, Letitia mentioned a sort of mental fatigue she'd been feeling. I said that if she ever needed practical help, I was available. She thanked me, but was always guarded whenever the conversation turned toward family matters. Even so, that walk changed something between us. We started talking daily, either through quick calls or text messages. She was always busy with the clinic, and I with my repairs, but we found small gaps to see each other. A month went by before she invited me over to her house for the first time. She said she would prepare a simple dinner and that Talitha wouldn't be around, as she'd be spending the weekend at a friend's place. I was excited, prepared a cornmeal cake to bring, and arrived at the scheduled time. Letitia's home was discreet, with no major luxuries, yet very cozy inside. Right at the entrance, I smelled homemade cooking, something like a meat stew with spices. During dinner, she got distracted and let slip that Talitha had actually agreed to leave the house that weekend because she couldn't stand me. That threw me off, because I hadn't even met the girl properly. Letitia tried to soften the remark, saying her daughter was going through a difficult phase and that any change in their family routine was a trigger for conflict. I said I understood and didn't blame her. I appreciated that Letitia was gradually opening up to me even under stress. The following days were peaceful until one very hot week, Letitia called asking me to come back to the clinic. This time it wasn't the air conditioners but the electrical wiring that was acting up. I checked everything, and when I was done, she invited me over for dinner at her house, promising that Talitha would be there this time. It was a Friday night. I arrived on time carrying a 2-liter bottle of soda. Letitia greeted me cheerfully, but when I walked in, I found Talitha sitting on the couch, staring fixedly at her phone. She didn't make any move to stand. I tried breaking the ice. "Hi, how are you? I'm Humbert." She only glanced up for a split second and went back to typing without a word. Letitia, embarrassed, led me into the kitchen where she was finishing dinner. I stayed there helping wash the dishes she used, talking about trivial things until Talitha appeared in the doorway. She wore dark clothes, heavy makeup, and had an expression suggesting constant boredom. She made no effort to be polite during dinner. She threw out harsh remarks, questioning why her mother would bring someone who, in her view, had nothing to offer. Letitia tried to ease the tension, saying I was hard-working and honest. At one point, Talitha looked at me and said, "Are you sure it's just honesty? Or are you trying to take a shortcut into my mother's life?" I was speechless. Her words seemed loaded with something I couldn't decipher. I said nothing. Letitia looked mortified. After dinner, the girl went back to her room, slamming the door. Not wanting to prolong the evening, I said my goodbyes, and Letitia walked me to the door, apologizing. I reassured her that it was fine, that her daughter had her own issues. Still, I started noticing a tension that hadn't been there before. Letitia talked less and less about Talitha, and I didn't push. When we were together, she seemed relaxed, but as soon as conversation drifted toward her home life, I saw a heaviness in her eyes. Things got truly unsettling when Letitia called me on a Sunday morning, saying that all her kitchen appliances had burned out simultaneously. I found it odd and went over with my tools. The microwave, blender, and toaster were all ruined at the same time. I opened each one and noticed strong signs of a short circuit, not something I often saw. I wondered if it was an overload in the electrical grid or a problem in the house's internal wiring. While I worked on the appliances, Talitha showed up to watch. She didn't speak, just stared at me. Occasionally she'd leave, rummage in a drawer, then come back. When I finished, she asked, "Do you believe in energies that influence what happens around us?" I wasn't expecting that question. "I guess I believe we can project good or bad vibes, but I'm not really into mysticism." She gave a slight laugh, which made me uneasy, and returned to her room. At that moment, I felt a heavy air in the house, although I couldn't describe or prove it. I left, sensing something was out of place. A few days later, Letitia and I arranged another meeting. Lunch at a simple restaurant serving homemade food at communal tables. She seemed nervous. She explained that Talitha had been coming home in the early hours, that her room smelled like incense, and she was collecting strange images with scratched-out symbols in notebooks. She won't listen to me, and I don't know where I went wrong. I tried to comfort her but came up empty. I suggested she speak with a professional, but she wanted to wait. She said her daughter was going through a rough phase, still coping with her father's death and feeling anger toward the world. Letitia confessed she had thought about calling the police or social services, but she had no evidence of anything that might warrant such extreme measures. Still, she planned on scheduling a psychology appointment for Talitha. The following week, there was an event at the clinic, some sort of outreach program. I went to install new fans. At the end of the day, Letitia introduced me to her brother, Pliny, who had come to help as a volunteer. He was friendly, nothing unusual about him. We chatted about soccer, car mechanics, just regular topics. He struck me as very open and easygoing. Shortly thereafter, I also met Letitia's mother, Mrs. Clotilda, an older woman with white hair and a perpetually worried expression. She smiled when Letitia introduced us, but soon began asking about her granddaughter. She said something like, That girl needs boundaries, otherwise she'll drag everyone into the same pit. It raised a red flag for me, but I didn't probe further. Maybe it was just a grandmother venting. Things turned more serious on a rainy Saturday night when Letitia called me. Her voice was trembling. She said Talitha had left without saying where she was going and wasn't answering her phone. I asked if she needed help looking for her, but she preferred me to come over and keep her company. I hopped in my car right away. The streets were almost empty in the downpour. When I arrived, I found Letitia worn out, sitting on the couch, clutching a mug of tea. I sat with her, trying to give some comfort. Around midnight, Talitha came in quietly, leaving the door half open. She noticed me, but treated me like I was just another piece of furniture. When Letitia tried to speak, Talitha interrupted. "Are you scared? Or do you think I'm doing something wrong?" Letitia asked where she'd been. Without giving a direct answer, Talitha went to her room, leaving the door slightly ajar. We heard nothing else. I left soon after, worried but unsure how to help. In the days that followed, I started having headaches and an unshakable fatigue. I assumed it was just overwork, but nothing at home cheered me up. At night, I began having vivid, confusing dreams, featuring a feminine figure I couldn't quite see but that made my heart pound when I woke up. This happened repeatedly over several nights. On a Wednesday, I had to miss work because of a fever and nausea. I woke up around 11, checked my phone, and saw messages from Letitia. She wrote about flickering lights in her house, about appliances failing even after repairs. I told her my symptoms, and she said she also felt weak, was sleeping poorly, and had severe migraines. According to her, she'd lost a few pounds without explanation. On one sleepless night, I got a call from an old co-worker, Douglas, who also did electrical work but had an interest in alternative medicine and popular beliefs. He'd heard I was unwell and wanted to offer help. After I gave him a rough description of my problems, Douglas mentioned a man living on a small farm outside the city who performed blessings. He wasn't a famous faith healer, just someone who prayed and used herbs in a modest way. A few days later, I gathered my courage and drove about an hour out of town to this rural property. The place was rustic, with no electricity. A man in a straw hat greeted me and invited me to sit on a wooden stool. While he heated water on a wood stove, he asked me directly what I was feeling. I told him about my malaise, insomnia, and the strange happenings at a friend's house. He listened carefully and asked me to close my eyes and focus on my breathing. Next, the man passed a bundle of herbs around my body, murmuring prayers I didn't recognize. When he finished, he said something that unsettled me. "You're being followed by a shadow that isn't yours." I pressed him for details, but he wouldn't elaborate. He only warned me to be careful about going back to Letitia's place because there seemed to be a confusing energy source there, something that could affect anyone who got close. He didn't mention witchcraft or anything like that, but he made it clear there were greater forces at play. I returned to the city with a head full of doubts. Letitia invited me for dinner that Friday. I was hesitant but agreed, wanting to see how she was. When I got there, I noticed Talitha wasn't home. Letitia said her daughter had gone on a trip with a friend. She seemed relieved. During dinner, I indeed saw the lights flicker occasionally for no apparent reason. The TV turned on, then lost its picture. The fridge was struggling to keep things cold, as if the power was fluctuating. Late that night, Letitia and I talked for hours until she fell asleep on the couch. I decided to check Talitha's room, hoping to find some clue to explain the odd occurrences. The door was closed. I hesitated for a moment before entering. The room was dark, with little visible. There was still an aroma of incense in the air. On the desk lay a notebook with symbols drawn in it, something like figures bound together by lines. I shut it quickly. As I turned to leave, I felt something brush my arm as though a hand touched me, but no one was there. I chalked it up to nerves. I went back to the living room. Letitia was sound asleep. I left her a note saying I'd gone home and quietly let myself out. Over the next few days, I started receiving anonymous text messages about invocations and ancient rites. They felt like veiled threats. I suspected Talitha was behind it, since the number was unfamiliar and the texts were full of abbreviations like a teenager might use. I didn't reply. I blocked the numbers, but new ones kept appearing. The messages continued, telling me this was just the beginning. My health took a turn for the worse. I was losing weight, couldn't focus. At night, I'd wake up sweaty, convinced someone had been in my house. Objects moved out of place. Light bulbs burned out more often than usual. Douglas, noticing my decline, suggested another person, a spiritual healer named Mrs. Aline, who lived in the older part of town. I visited her on a Sunday afternoon and found a gentle-voiced older lady who opened the door carefully. She asked my name, wanted me to describe everything from the start. While I spoke, she lit white candles and sprayed scented water around the room. By the end, she told me my case wasn't normal, that maybe Letitia's daughter was doing some sort of binding, but not the kind you see in simple love spells. It seemed like something designed to control a person's will, create dependency, and drain vital energy. I asked if there was a way to undo it. She said yes, but it required, among other things, cutting off all contact. She also warned that if the other person had powerful allies, it would be necessary to strengthen prayers and protection rituals. I left her house thoughtful, not knowing how I'd break that news to Letitia. 2 days later, I tried calling Letitia, but her phone was always out of service. The clinic staff said she was on leave. I went to her house to see if she was okay. Talitha answered the door. She opened it just enough to show half her face. She wouldn't let me in and said, "My mom doesn't want to talk to you." Then she closed the door. I went home, worried. That night, another text arrived with a photo of me stepping out of my car in front of Letitia's place. Under the image, a short line read, "You can try to run, but you're already marked." My fatigue reached a new level. I could barely eat and had dizzy spells at work. 3 days later, I collapsed during a repair job and had to be hospitalized for observation. Tests showed exhaustion and a compromised immune system. I spent a day and a half in the hospital. No doctor could pinpoint a specific cause other than chronic stress. Once I was discharged, I considered staying away from Letitia for good, but part of me felt guilty. I worried her situation would only worsen if she were left alone. So I wrote a letter and dropped it in her mailbox, asking her to call me when she could. The next day I found the letter in the same place, torn in half. However, I did see a note taped to the gate. "Stop insisting. You don't understand your place." No signature, but I had my suspicions. At that point, I began experiencing auditory hallucinations. Sometimes, in the afternoon silence, I'd hear someone whisper my name. Other times, I heard faint laughter nearby. I even thought about moving to another town. That was when Pliny, Letitia's brother, called. He said he was worried about his sister, that the house seemed uninhabitable. Inside, the lights kept going out, and Letitia wouldn't allow anyone in. He mentioned that Talitha had locked certain rooms and that even the doctors had backed off because Letitia refused to leave for more checkups. Pliny said a priest friend of the family had tried visiting, but Letitia wouldn't open the door and told him to leave. He asked me if I knew what might be happening. I didn't know how to answer. He wanted my help persuading Letitia to stay at their mother's place, but I didn't have the courage to go back there. Desperate for peace, I visited the spiritual healer again. She gave me a small pouch to wear around my neck, telling me not to remove it. She also showed me a simple ritual with water and coarse salt. I did what she instructed, sprinkling salt in the corners of my house, praying on my knees in the bedroom, asking for protection from powers I didn't fully understand. For the first few nights I thought it worked. I slept better, with fewer disturbances. One day I decided to drive by Letitia's place. It looked abandoned. The gate was ajar, the yard overrun by weeds. I called out, but no one answered. I left, afraid of running into Talitha. That night I got a call from another unknown number. When I picked up, I heard a slow, youthful voice. "Do you think you can solve everything with salt and prayers?" I recognized the tone, even though it was slightly distorted. It was Talitha. I hung up immediately, feeling more powerless than ever. The next morning I woke up with a scratch on my left shoulder, even though I'd been alone all night. A chill ran through me as I realized I wasn't safe in my own room. I went to work, but I couldn't stop thinking about Letitia. I asked around among the clinic staff. They said she'd sent in a medical note and hadn't shown up for over 2 weeks. I tried contacting her one more time to no avail. By then, I was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. On another sleepless night, I received a text, again from an unknown number. It said, "The bond is sealed. You only leave if I let you." That was when I realized I lacked the strength to fight alone. Soon after, Pliny called again, asking if we could go see Letitia together. I didn't want to say no, so on a Saturday morning we both got up the nerve to head to her house. We knocked, called out, nothing. Pliny, alarmed, forced the door open. Inside, the living room was dark, curtains drawn. There was a strong smell of incense and maybe mold or something else I couldn't identify. We found Letitia lying on the couch, drowsy, looking like she hadn't slept in days. She opened her eyes slowly, recognized us, and mumbled for us to leave. Pliny insisted we needed to take her to a hospital, but she refused. "I just need to rest." It was obvious she was in bad shape. While Pliny tried convincing her, I took a chance and went upstairs to Talitha's room. The door was wide open. It was empty, with no clothes, books, or any sign that someone lived there. On the bed there was a small wooden box covered in strange symbols. On impulse I opened it, but couldn't make sense of what was inside. Objects tied with threads, small cloth dolls with faces painted black. Returning to the living room, I saw Letitia had gone completely unresponsive. I asked where her daughter was, but she just shook her head, her eyes half closed. Pliny called their mother, Mrs. Clotilda, who arrived by taxi soon after. She went in but came back out quickly, saying, "I can't stay in that house. It's like something's pushing me out." That was when she decided to call the priest again. He arrived in the late afternoon, spoke with us, but there wasn't much he could do without Letitia's permission. He tried to talk to her, but once it was clear she wouldn't allow a more elaborate ceremony, he left, looking unsettled. Now we were stuck. Her mother and brother didn't know where Talitha was, Letitia wouldn't answer anything, and I was in no shape to remain there. I went home and spent the night awake. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a noise in my backyard. I went to check. Nothing. But hanging on the back door handle was a braided cord of red and black threads. It seemed damp with something. I was so disturbed I wouldn't touch it. The next morning, I told my boss I was taking indefinite leave. I grabbed my belongings and drove somewhere far, where I had distant relatives. I stayed there for about 10 days, resting and trying to recuperate. The nightmares persisted, but less intensely. I hoped physical distance might break whatever link had formed. I came back to town only to sort out my bills and plan a permanent move. My first night home, I found a little cloth bag hanging from my front door with a note. "This isn't how you get out." I threw it in the trash without opening it. I started packing, determined to leave behind any memory of this dark chapter. In the midst of the mess, I opened my closet and discovered a piece of paper stained with blotches of what looked like ink. I recognized parts of those same symbols I'd seen in Talitha's notebook. I had no idea how it ended up in my closet. I tossed it right away. Next morning, I left before dawn while most people were still asleep. I didn't tell anyone. I half expected her to appear in the street watching me, but she didn't. I drove until sunrise, mind spinning. Today, it's been almost a year since those events. I live in another region and have a job that doesn't require so many house calls. Sometimes I dream I'm inside a dark house, looking for someone who isn't there. In some of these dreams, Talitha appears at the end of a hallway, but she doesn't speak. She just holds out a red braided thread. I wake up sweating, unsure if it's only in my head or if something else still lingers. I never saw Letitia again or heard any solid news about Talitha. Sometimes I blame myself for not helping them more. Other times, I think it was my only option to stay sane. I still carry the protective pouch Mrs. Aline gave me, maybe for security, maybe for superstition. Perhaps I'll never know the full truth. All I know is that each day I try to believe these things are behind me. But deep down, I'm not sure if that chapter is truly over. Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Click the notification bell to stay updated on all future narrations. I post new videos here every day. I hope to see you in the next one. On the screen now, I'm leaving 2 other great videos I know you'll enjoy. See you there.